Hakim, if anything ever happens to me, and people start running up and down, go into my study. Behind the shelf near the window, there's a small metal box. That box has my real story inside it. If you trust me, protect it. Mr. Job had no wife anymore. The years had taken her away, leaving behind only memories sealed in dusty photo frames and silent corners of the house where her laughter once echoed. She had been his calm, his conscience, and his compass. Since her passing, a void settled in his heart, a space no one else could truly fill. Though he had a daughter, she lived abroad, thriving in a world far removed from the one her father had built. The calls had become fewer, the visits even rarer. She had carved out her own path and, in doing so, seemed to abandon the world that raised her. Mr. Job understood, or at least tried to. But understanding didn't silence the aching emptiness of a home with no one to share its warmth. In the absence of his wife and the emotional distance of his daughter, Mr. Job's life became crowded with relatives, cousins, nephews, nieces, and siblings who clung to him like bees to honey. They buzzed around him with feigned concern and counterfeit loyalty. Most of them had no jobs, no ambitions, and no shame. They relied on him for their daily bread, for rent, for school fees they never paid on time, for luxuries they hadn't earned. He was their ATM, their benefactor, their golden goose. And though they often called him Uncle Job with reverence, he could see through the plastic smiles and well-rehearsed gratitude. He wasn't family to them, he was a resource. Each year, Mr. Job's suspicion thickened like smoke in a closed room. He watched them more closely. He listened not just to what they said, but what they didn't. He noticed how quickly their faces turned sour when he denied a request. He saw how they whispered behind his back, how their warmth vanished when his wallet stayed shut. In private, he often asked himself, if I were to die today, would they shed genuine tears, or would they scramble like vultures around my corpse, clawing at my possessions with greedy fingers? That question haunted him. It became a drumbeat in his soul, loudest at night when the house was quiet and the weight of solitude pressed against his chest. He imagined his funeral, not with mourners soaked in sorrow, but with relatives calculating inheritance before the coffin was sealed. He pictured them arguing over properties, businesses, and bank accounts, each one feeling more entitled than the next. Not a single one would remember how he had struggled, how he had sacrificed, how he had built everything from nothing. They would not honor his legacy, they would consume it. And so, Mr. Job lived among shadows, people who called him family but behaved like predators in disguise. His wealth was both his fortress and his prison. It protected him from lack but exposed him to exploitation. Every smile around him felt loaded. Every gesture, a performance. He longed for sincerity, for connection, for someone who loved him not for what he had but for who he was. But in this new season of his life, surrounded by opportunists and haunted by doubts, Mr. Job knew he had a decision to make, one that would test everything and everyone around him. But for now, he simply watched and waited. Would anyone prove him wrong? One rainy evening, as the downpour painted streaks against his white glass windows, Mr. Job sat alone in his study, a quiet sanctuary where luxury met loneliness. A cup of untouched tea steamed beside a stack of unopened letters, mostly requests for money. He stared into the fire, his mind churning. For decades, he had built empires, signed billionaire deals, and transformed struggling businesses into booming enterprises. Yet now, in the stillness of his twilight years, he felt like a stranger in his own kingdom. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. He had everything, and yet nothing. He thought of his daughter, once a bright-eyed girl who clung to his legs and laughed when he tickled her belly. Where was that little girl now? The woman she'd become barely called anymore. Her last visit had been 4 years ago, and even then, she stayed in a hotel, citing comfort and space. She loved him, he believed that, but from a distance. A very safe, convenient distance. He couldn't blame her entirely. Perhaps he had focused too much on building wealth and too little on building relationships. But what haunted him more than her absence was the presence of those who should never have gotten close. Relatives paraded through his compound daily, bringing endless stories: a cousin's failed business venture, a nephew's school admission, an aunt's medical emergency. They knew how to play their parts well, like seasoned actors in a tragedy he didn't audition for. Their hands were always outstretched, and their mouths always full of praise. But Mr. Job had lived long enough to read between smiles. He saw the greed behind their compliments, the entitlement laced in their gratitude. They weren't concerned about his well-being, they were preoccupied with his bank balance. And yet, he gave. He gave because giving had become his identity, his burden, his curse. But something inside him was shifting. The spark of suspicion had grown into a flame of bitterness. He had overheard a conversation recently, a careless whisper by two cousins who thought he was asleep. They spoke about what they would claim once the old man finally dropped. Not if, but when. Their words left a stain on his soul. He didn't confront them. He didn't need to. The truth had already settled in his bones. That night, he made a quiet vow: they would all be tested. Not through anger. Not through confrontation. But through a plan so quiet, so calculated, it would expose every heart for what it truly was. If they only loved him for his wealth, he would strip it away, or at least the illusion of it. If they mourned him just for the sake of inheritance, he would give them something to mourn. He had watched enough betrayal to know what was coming if he did nothing. He walked to his safe, unlocked it with steady hands, and pulled out a thin folder, one he had prepared years ago but never opened. Inside were the details of a plan that would change everything. If they believed he was gone, who would rise with loyalty, and who would be swallowed by greed? He was about to find out. A few weeks later, Mr. Job stood on the balcony of his mansion, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. His heart was heavy, but his mind was clear. The time had come to act. He hadn't shared his plan with anyone. Not even Akim, the loyal gateman who had served him faithfully for over 20 years. Akim had seen it all: the glamorous parties, the political visits, the luxury cars, and the long line of relatives who always seemed to have emergencies at the end of every month. But Akim had never asked for more than his wages, never stepped into the main house unless called, never showed even the slightest sign of envy. He was dependable, quiet, and disciplined. A rare breed.
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
It was on a quiet Sunday morning, just after dawn, that Mr. Job engaged Akim in a conversation that would unknowingly become the seed of his grand test. They were standing in the backyard. Mr. Job had come out for fresh air, and Akim was watering the flowers, as he always did. "Papa," Akim said respectfully, using the name everyone in the compound called him, "you don't sleep well these days. Is everything all right?" Mr. Job smiled faintly, his eyes distant. "Tell me, Akim, if something happened to me, suddenly, let's say, what would you do?" Akim stopped, hoe still in hand, brows knitted. "Oh. God forbid, sir. Nothing will happen to you, sir." But, he hesitated, thinking deeply, if something somehow happened, I would just continue to take care of this house like you're coming back. I don't know book like your daughter, or speak big English like your relatives, but this place, it's my home too. Mr. Job looked at him silently, touched by the honesty in those words. Akim didn't mention money. He didn't ask what would be left for him. He spoke like a man who saw beyond riches, like someone who valued legacy, not leftovers. That answer confirmed something in Mr. Job's heart. Hakim, the man the family often ignored, was the only one who might do what was right when everything else fell apart. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Mr. Job began the final steps of his secret plan. He had made arrangements with his lawyers, hidden key documents, transferred specific assets into temporary holding, and instructed that news of his disappearance be carefully staged. It wouldn't be a death, no obituary, no funeral. Just silence. A void. An unanswered question. He would vanish. And then he would watch. He would see who would protect what was his, and who would tear it apart. It happened on a cool Wednesday morning, barely a week after his quiet conversation with Hakim. The compound was still drowsy when the news broke: Mr. Job was missing. No one saw him leave. No vehicle was taken. His phone was left behind, screen dark and silent. His room was untouched, his clothes still hung neatly in the wardrobe, but he was gone as if the earth had swallowed him. Panic didn't spread immediately. After all, he had sometimes traveled without notice. But by the second day, when his driver said he hadn't been given any instructions, and his secretary hadn't booked any flights or meetings, whispers began to grow into worry. Hakim was the first to act. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. But deep inside, a sense of duty flared. He remembered what Mr. Job had once told him months ago in passing, an instruction so casual it almost seemed like a joke at the time. Hakim, if anything ever happens to me, and people start running up and down, go into my study. Behind the shelf near the window, there's a small metal box. That box has my real story inside it. If you trust me, protect it. He hadn't thought much of it back then. But now, with Mr. Job missing, those words echoed in his ears like a bell. That same morning, before the relatives began to flood the house like ants around sugar, Hakim took a quiet walk into the main building. He had never entered the study without permission. The scent of old books and polished wood greeted him as he stepped inside. Everything was exactly as Mr. Job had left it. With careful hands, he moved the heavy bookshelf beside the window, and there it was, a small, rust-proof metal box, locked and dusty. He lifted it, surprisingly heavy for its size, and carried it straight to his tiny room beside the gatehouse. He wrapped it in a faded Ankara cloth and tucked it beneath a loose floorboard he had used to hide his savings over the years. No one would find it there, not unless they tore the floor apart. By the time the first car rolled into the compound later that afternoon, Hakim was already back at his post, silent and steady, the box secured. The relatives came with fake panic and exaggerated concern. They wailed louder than necessary, asked questions without waiting for answers, and began poking around the house like scavengers. By the third day, they had convened in the living room, holding urgent meetings about what should happen next, who should take over his properties, who had access to his accounts, and what lawyer to call for clarification. None of them asked if he might be alive. They spoke of him in past tense already. But Hakim watched them all, calm as ever. He alone knew there was a metal box, though he himself knew nothing about what is inside, and inside it, so many documents that named beneficiaries, letters handwritten by Mr. Job himself, instructions for every major asset, and most importantly, a will that would shock them all. And Hakim, the humble gateman nobody ever noticed, was now the silent guardian of everything. Within a week of Mr. Job's disappearance, the mansion had transformed from a sanctuary into a battlefield of entitlement. His cousins, nephews, and half-siblings arrived in waves, their faces painted with mock concern but their eyes scanning the property like hungry hawks. Some brought overnight bags. Others brought lawyers. They quickly formed factions, each claiming to know Mr. Job best, each convinced they had a right to his empire. The living room became a courtroom, the dining room and negotiation table. There were heated arguments about his houses, his cars, his shares in multiple companies, and even his personal belongings. One nephew suggested selling the entire estate and splitting the proceeds. Another insisted the mansion should be his, as he had spent more Christmases here than the rest. In the midst of all this noise, Hakeem kept to himself. He swept the compound like always, watered the plants, opened and shut the gate, answered calls with "No update yet, sir," and remained as invisible as he had always been. But quietly, he was watching everything. The greed was unbelievable. Within 10 days, 2 of the newer SUVs were missing, borrowed by relatives who claimed they needed them for errands related to Mr. Job's case. One of the shops in town that Mr. Job owned had its locks broken, and the goods inside were quickly sold off. Even the pantry was raided, with relatives taking boxes of wine and expensive imported snacks to keep their strength up. Hakeem reported none of this to the police. He didn't raise his voice or question anyone. He knew better. These people saw him as just a servant, uneducated, harmless, and easily ignored. But every night, while they slept, he documented everything. He kept a notebook under his pillow, writing names, times, items taken, and conversations overheard. He wrote it all as Mr. Job had once taught him when he helped organize the household records. Details matter, Hakeem. One day, you'll understand why. And then came the day one of the cousins, a sharp-tongued woman named Janet, decided Hakeem was too comfortable. "What's this gate man still doing here?" she spat during a family meeting. "Papa is gone. This is a new season. Why is he still opening the gate like he owns the house?" Her brother agreed. "He's probably hiding something. These gate boys always know more than they say." Hakeem remained quiet. He knew the game was changing. But the tide turned when one of the younger nephews, in a drunken state, began tearing through the study, searching for documents. "There must be a will somewhere," he slurred. "He can't just vanish without saying who gets what." When they found nothing, no envelope, no signature, no clear direction, they panicked. A lawyer was called. But without official proof of death, the lawyer could not release any estate assets. The court required evidence. Until then, everything was frozen, except what they were already stealing under the table. As the days turned into weeks, the mansion became more chaotic than ever. Furniture was shifted, drawers emptied, safes cracked open. Mr. Job's relatives, sensing that legal ownership was out of reach for now, resorted to sheer opportunism. Anything not nailed down was considered fair game. It was no longer mourning, it was a feeding frenzy. But in the middle of the storm, Hakeem stood like a quiet wall. He had never opened the metal box. Not because he wasn't curious, he was, but because he remembered the gravity in Mr. Job's voice when he gave the instruction. "Protect it. That's all I ask." And so Hakeem had hidden it, not in a wardrobe, not beneath his mattress, but under a loose floorboard he had pried open carefully in his one-room quarters by the gate. He wrapped the box in 2 thick layers of cloth and laid it between the earth and the plank, replacing the board so neatly that even he had to mark it subtly with chalk to find it again. Still, fear grew in his chest every day. Because the relatives were becoming suspicious. They knew something was missing, there had to be a will. Everyone could sense it. Mr. Job was not a man who would leave his vast empire to be squabbled over like bushmeat. He was meticulous. Smart. He had planned everything in life, surely he had planned for death, too. One evening, just before sunset, trouble arrived at Hakeem's door. 2 of the nephews, Raffle and David, burst into his room unannounced. Raffle was tall and arrogant, with the look of a man who thought every servant owed him respect. David was quieter, but just as dangerous, the kind who smiled while watching everything. "Hakeem, Raphael barked, "Stand up. We want to search here." Hakim froze. His hands trembled slightly, but he tried to mask it. "Search? Search for what, sir? You think we don't know?" David said, stepping inside with muddy shoes. "You were close to Papa. You lived here day and night. You must have seen where he kept his will." "I don't know anything about will, sir," Hakim replied, his voice low but steady. But his heart thundered in his chest. He stood aside helplessly as they rummaged through his belongings, his single wooden wardrobe, his mattress, even his metal cooking pot. They upturned his small trunk, threw his clothes onto the floor, checked his shoes, and his ceiling board. One of them even lifted the mat, inspecting the concrete underneath. When they began to tap the floorboards, Hakim's legs nearly gave way. He clenched his fist behind his back, praying silently, begging the earth to stay silent. The men stomped on the wood, testing for hollows. At one point, Raphael's foot landed dangerously close to the marked board. Hakim's breath stopped. But then David, wiping sweat from his forehead, sighed. "There's nothing here. Let's go." And just like that, they left. As their footsteps faded, Hakim sank slowly to the ground, sweat pouring down his back. He stared at the floor, at that single hidden board, and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." From that day, Hakim became even more careful. He began sleeping with one eye open, never straying far from the compound, never letting his guard down. He did not know what was in the metal box, whether it was a will, a deed, a confession, or just old letters. All he knew was that it mattered. That box mattered more than anything else. And no matter what, he would guard it, with his life, if he had to. Then one rainy afternoon, as lightning split the sky and thunder growled like a beast, David came knocking again. Alone. This time, he wasn't aggressive. "Hakim," he said softly, "can I sit here for a moment? The house is too noisy." Hakim nodded, stepping aside. He watched David enter and sit on the edge of his small bed, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "You've been quiet," David said after a long pause. "Everyone else is fighting. But you just watch." Hakim said nothing. His eyes darted toward the plank under which the box lay. He quickly looked away. David leaned forward. "Tell me the truth, Hakim. Did Uncle ever mention anything before he vanished? Anything at all?" Hakim stood stiff. His tongue felt like stone in his mouth. "No, sir. I only pray he is safe wherever he is." David smiled faintly. "You're loyal, I see. Maybe too loyal." Then, he stood up and patted Hakim on the shoulder. "Well, if anything ever comes to your mind, Hakim, even a small thing, come to me first. Not Janet, not Raphael. Me. You understand?" Hakim nodded slowly. David left, and Hakim locked his door with shaking hands. He fell to his knees by the bed, pressed his head to the cold concrete floor, and whispered once more, "Oh God, Job. I don't know what's in this box, but I will keep it, even if it costs me my life." And that night, as the rain poured harder and the house raged with more quarrels, Hakim reinforced the floorboard again, this time with screws. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just as the relatives were arguing over who should inherit the guest house in Lekki, that the security guard at the gate called Raphael aside. "Oga," he whispered, "one old man is asking for the owner of the house. Says his name is Mr. Eshola. He carry book full hand and wear glasses like professor. Say no Mr. Job, old classmate from Ibadan." Raphael, irritated, waved his hand. "Tell him to go, Joe. We don't have time for beggars claiming old ties." But curiosity got the better of David, who was passing by. He followed the guard to the gate and saw a slender, gray-haired man in a faded academic jacket, round glasses, and a tie that had clearly seen better days. The man held a leather satchel, heavy with papers. "Good day, sir," David said carefully. "Can we help you?" "Oh," the man exclaimed, lifting his head with surprise. "So this is the house of my dear friend, Job Olanowaju. Oh, this house hasn't changed much. Except for the gates, perhaps. Is Job in?" David blinked. "You haven't heard." "Heard what?" Mr. Eshola asked, frowning. David sighed dramatically. "Mr. Job has been missing for over a month now. We've turned this city upside down looking for him."
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
Missing. Eshola clutched his chest. Ewu. What a tragedy. I just came back from overseas. We used to sit together in class at the university. Job and I were like twins, mathematics and philosophy, eh? That man had a brilliant brain. So he disappeared. He looked genuinely disturbed, too disturbed. Janet, who had caught wind of the discussion, came marching down with arms folded. "Who are you, sir, and how did you know Uncle Job again?" "I'm Eshola." "Professor E. Eshola," he said firmly. "We studied together in Ibadan, then both went our ways. I became a lecturer abroad. He became who he became. I only just returned and thought to see my friend. Now you're telling me he's missing." He sat down on the patio chair with a loud sigh. "Well, maybe I should stay for a few days," he added thoughtfully. "Sometimes, when we grow old, we hide things from even our family. Maybe something he left behind, a clue, an old book, a journal. If I look through his study, I might recognize something important. You know how academic people store things." Raphael was the first to object. "That won't be necessary. We've searched everything. Lawyers, police, community heads, we've involved them all. No will, no note, no clue." Mr. Eshola rubbed his chin. "You searched academically." Janet scoffed. "Academically quoi? What does that mean?" "Books, margins, footnotes, old test papers, handwriting, numerical codes." "Oh. You children of today don't understand how men like Job hide their legacy. We didn't type passwords on phones in our days. We encrypted our secrets in ink and ideas." David glanced at Janet. There was something about this man, he spoke with calm authority, almost like Mr. Job himself. "Let him stay," David said quietly. "Let's see what he finds." Reluctantly, they agreed. Mr. Eshola was assigned the guest room downstairs and given access to the late Mr. Job's study, though Janet made it clear that she would supervise every entry. But what they didn't know was that Mr. Eshola, this strange, old-school man in an academic outfit, wasn't just looking for clues, he was watching them. Every word. Every fight. Every betrayal. He was testing what they had become in his absence. Only Akim, though startled when he first saw Mr. Eshola, kept his reaction buried deep. There was something too familiar about the way the man adjusted his glasses. The way he bent his back slightly when he smiled. The sharpness in his eyes that flashed even through the wrinkles. He looked at Mr. Eshola long and hard one evening as he passed by. And Mr. Eshola looked back, just for a moment. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them, unspoken, powerful. And from that moment, Akim knew. Oga was watching. Akim had barely slept since Mr. Eshola arrived. Each time the old man walked past, Humming those familiar gospel tunes Mr. Job always sang while working late in the study, Hakim's heart thundered. He knew. He was sure. The voice, the mannerisms, the smell of mild camphor from old clothes, this wasn't just some long-lost friend from a burden. This was Oga. Mr. Job. In disguise. But Hakim said nothing. He remembered that day vividly, just 2 weeks before Mr. Job's sudden disappearance. It was an odd conversation, brief and cryptic. Mr. Job had leaned on the railing overlooking the garden and asked, Hakim, if something were to happen to me, what would you do? Hakim had chuckled nervously. Oga, nothing go happen to you. But, if something do, I go protect your house. I go keep things safe. That was when Mr. Job had turned to him with a solemn face and said, there's a metal box in my study cupboard, behind the second bookshelf. Don't open it. Just make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, no matter what happens. 3 nights after the disappearance, while the rest of the house was in chaos, Hakim had crept into the study, moved the bookshelf with trembling hands, and retrieved the dusty metal box. He didn't open it. He didn't even shake it. He wrapped it in a plastic bag, covered it in old clothes, and hid it in a cavity under the floorboard of his tiny room in the boys' quarters. The box stayed there, untouched. But now, with the arrival of Mr. Eshola, everything changed. Each time the relatives rummaged through the study, breaking locks and shouting over furniture, Hakim remained outside, his heart pounding. Raphael, Janet, and David had begun to fight openly now, over lands, over cars, even over Mr. Job's tailored suits. One day, Janet came storming out of the main house toward the boys' quarters. Hakim, she yelled. I hope you're not hiding anything in that your room. We're searching everyone's space today. Some documents are missing. Hakim's heart nearly stopped. Me? Hide something. God forbid. David followed, waving a plastic file. We just found an envelope with survey plans. If you've got anything, talk now. They searched his small room top to bottom. Pulled open drawers, scattered his cooking pots, yanked his mattress. But they didn't find the floorboard. Hakim had cleverly patched it over with cement dust and flattened his prayer mat across it. When they left in frustration, Hakim sat on the bed, shaking, whispering prayers. That night, he passed Mr. Eshola on the corridor. Their eyes met again. The old man said nothing, but Hakim thought he saw the faintest smile tug at his lips. Later that evening, Mr. Eshola asked for tea and called Hakim to bring it himself. When Hakim placed the tray on the table, the old man gently touched his wrist. Young man, he said in a raspy voice, do you believe that loyalty still exists in this world? Hakim nodded slowly. Yes, sir. And do you think a loyal man should keep a promise even when the world turns against him? Yes, sir, Hakim said, looking straight at him. Mr. Eshola's eyes glistened behind his glasses. Good. Very good. He sipped the tea and leaned back. Then hold tight to what you're protecting, no matter how heavy. Sometimes, we test the ones we trust, not to see if they pass or fail, but to know what they are truly made of. Hakim swallowed hard and nodded. It was all the confirmation he needed. He was being watched, evaluated, trusted. From that moment, Hakim began to move with sharper caution. He spoke less. He watched more. When the relatives accused him of knowing something, he acted dumb. When they insulted him, he bowed quietly. But every night, he placed a chair against the door and slept lightly, one eye open, guarding the floor beneath his feet. Because somewhere under that prayer mat lay the box that could change everything. And Hakim would rather die than let it fall into the wrong hands. The sun filtered lazily through the tall glass windows of the living room. Mr. Eshola, still dressed in his now familiar threadbare academic outfit, patched at the elbow and always smelling faintly of camphor, sat silently, sipping pap from a calabash. He had now been in the house for 3 weeks, and though everyone called him that old friend from Mr. Job's university days, his presence had unsettled more than a few people. He wasn't loud. He wasn't demanding. But his silence spoke volumes, and his questions even more. The first test came on a lazy Wednesday morning. Raphael was sitting in the lounge, scrolling through his phone, legs crossed on the armrest of the sofa like he owned it. Mr. Eshola shuffled over and sat beside him, placing a leather folder on the table. "Young man," he said with a shaky voice, while searching some of the old bookcases, "I found a document. Something to do with power of attorney. I think it bears Raphael's name." Raphael sat up immediately. "Really? My name?" Mr. Eshola nodded slowly. "Yes, though my eyes are not what they used to be. It's in Mr. Job's handwriting. He once mentioned to me, during our school days, that if he were ever to disappear, he'd leave instructions hidden in plain sight." Raphael's eyes widened. "Where's the document?" "I left it in the study, somewhere between his old books on ethics and business law." Raphael didn't even wait to thank the old man. He bolted from the sofa, ran to the study, and began pulling books down in a frenzy. Within minutes, he was shouting at David and Janet, accusing them of hiding something from him. "I know what you both are doing. You think you'll get everything." Mr. Eshola smiled faintly. There was no document. The next day, Mr. Eshola cornered Janet in the kitchen, where she was instructing one of the housemates to prepare a special stew for herself alone. "My dear," he said kindly, "I recall Mr. Job once told me that if anyone really wanted to understand his values, they should check inside the brown envelope tucked behind his framed family portrait." Janet's brows arched. "Which portrait?" "The one in his bedroom, the one of him and his daughter. I believe he said the envelope contains something about legacy and sacrifice." Janet excused herself mid-sentence, rushed upstairs, and began peeling off the photo frame like it was wrapped in gold. She found nothing, but still unscrewed the backing and searched for an envelope until the frame cracked. When she returned, her lips were tight. She didn't speak to Mr. Eshola again that day. On Friday, he approached David in the backyard while he washed one of the SUVs. "Young man," he began, coughing slightly, "do you believe in destiny?" David shrugged. "Depends." Mr. Eshola nodded. "I once had a friend, wise, quiet, much like your uncle, who said the key to his legacy lay in something as small as a single key. He said anyone who found the key to the green cabinet in his garage would find his true heir." David froze. "The green cabinet?" "Yes, but only the one with the original key, not the duplicate. That's how he said he'd know who truly knew him." That night, David unscrewed the entire green cabinet in the garage. No key. No documents. Nothing but a pair of Mr. Job's old boots and a broken radio. Each of them was now on edge. They didn't trust each other. Whispers followed every meal. Secrets turned into accusations. They began searching each other's rooms. Even Akim noticed the heightened tension. He kept his distance, sweeping quietly, avoiding eye contact. But Mr. Eshola always gave him a nod in passing. One night, Akim entered the corridor to collect the dinner tray from Mr. Eshola's room. The old man opened the door himself and looked him straight in the eye. "They are showing their true colors," he said softly, "but the time is not yet right." Akim lowered his gaze. "Yes, sir." "Keep the fire low, but don't let it go out," Mr. Eshola added. "The pot will soon boil over." Akim bowed, heart thudding. The atmosphere in the compound had become thick with suspicion and silent hostility. The once spacious mansion now felt like a crowded war zone of whispers, side glances, and secret searches. Mr. Eshola's subtle games had rattled everyone. The so-called cousins and nephews, once united by their mutual greed, now found themselves driven by paranoia, and in their desperation, they found a common enemy. On a humid Saturday evening, Raphael called a family meeting in the main lounge. David slouched on the sofa, arms crossed. Janet stood by the window, arms folded tightly, her jaw clenched. A few other distant relatives trickled in, each bearing the same anxious look. Mr. Eshola entered slowly, leaning on his wooden cane, and sat on a low stool near the television. His calmness only intensified their irritation. Raphael was the first to speak. Sir, with all due respect, we appreciate your concern and your presence. But it's been over 3 weeks now, and nothing you've said or done has helped us find Mr. Job. Instead, you've only confused things further. David nodded. You've sent everyone running in circles. One day it's a document. Another day it's a hidden key. You've turned the house into a treasure hunt. Janet stepped forward. And what exactly do you want from us, Mr. Eshola? You say you're our uncle's old friend, but we don't even have any proof of that. No photo, no letter, no call logs. Just your word. The room went quiet. Mr. Eshola didn't flinch. He looked at each of them, one after the other, his eyes steady and unreadable. I came here to help, he said, voice low but firm. I thought perhaps someone who truly loved Job might still be looking, not for what they could get, but for who he was. You've overstayed your welcome, Raphael snapped. You've caused enough confusion. If you really cared about Mr. Job, you should be out there with the police, not sitting in his house playing riddles. Janet added, we've discussed it. You need to leave by tomorrow. If you don't, we'll involve the police. This is not your home. For a long moment, Mr. Eshola said nothing. Then he gave a slow nod. I understand, he murmured. By tomorrow, I'll be gone. Then he rose, his frame slightly bent, and walked out of the lounge without another word. From the shadows near the back entrance, Akim had been listening. His heart pounded. He watched Mr. Eshola retreat to the guest room and shut the door quietly behind him. That night, Akim couldn't sleep. What if the old man truly left? What if this whole thing unraveled because of their greed? And most of all, was he, Akim, still safe? Just before dawn, there was a soft knock at Akim's small room. He opened it and found Mr. Eshola standing outside, a leather-bound notebook in his hand. They want me gone, he said. So I go. But the fire will still burn, Akim. You just guard that box. The night will soon give way to morning. He placed the notebook gently on Akim's table and walked away. By the time the sun crested the rooftops, laughter had returned to the compound, cruel, shallow laughter. The unspoken fear that had gripped Raphael, Janet, David, and the rest of the family for weeks had lifted. Mr. Eshola was gone. The strange old man with riddles and questions had finally packed his old briefcase and left that morning in a rickety taxi.
I hope you are enjoying the story. Please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so that you will be notified anytime I upload new video. Now let's continue the story.
By noon, music blared faintly from the Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen. Janet was baking meat pies, celebration food, she called it. Raphael uncorked the bottle of red wine he had kept hidden in one of Mr. Job's cabinets. David was making calls to his friends again, boasting about how some nosy academic beggar had been sent packing. They always come for a piece of the pie, Raphael chuckled. He was looking for a back door into the inheritance. Old fool. Meanwhile, Akim swept the compound slowly, his hands trembling. He had barely touched the notebook Mr. Eshola had left behind. Deep in his gut, he knew something wasn't over. He stayed out of sight, eyes low, ears sharp. A week after, a black Toyota Hilux and a grey Toyota Camry pulled up in front of the compound. The doors opened, and 3 men in dark suits stepped out, 2 lawyers and a uniformed police officer. Then came the 4th man, Mr. Eshola. He was dressed in that faded academic outfit. The gate was wide open. The laughter stopped abruptly as the men marched in. "Everyone, please take a seat," the police officer ordered, voice combat commanding. "We have official business concerning Mr. Job's estate." Wait, what is going on?" Janet asked, rising to her feet. Raphael squinted. "What's this old man doing back here? Who invited the police?" But then, Mr. Eshola raised his hand gently. "You all wanted proof," he said, his voice rich and clear. "You questioned my identity. You chased me from my own house." He took a step forward. "Well, let me introduce myself properly. I am Mr. Job, the very man whose death or disappearance you've been feasting on." He took off all the disguised costumes and he looked exactly Mr. Job. Gasps filled the air. Janet dropped her teacup. Raphael staggered backward, hitting the dining table. David opened his mouth to speak but no words came out. You're lying," Raphael stammered. "This might be a ghost. Mr. Job is gone." Before he could finish, one of the lawyers pulled out a flash drive and slotted it into the TV system. The screen blinked to life, showing footage from hidden CCTV cameras, recordings that none of the family ever knew existed. The first clip showed the day after Mr. Job's disappearance. Raphael breaking into Mr. Job's bedroom. Janet tearing apart drawers and photo frames. David sneaking out with wads of cash and a wristwatch. One by one, the clips rolled, their faces unmistakable. Their voices, their lies, their arguments about who should take the cars, the electronics, the land documents. The room was silent. Then came the final clip, the moment Mr. Job, still dressed as Mr. Eshola, stood by the corridor watching them fight, his face unreadable. "You thought I was dead," he said coldly. "You didn't even bother filing a missing person report until after the 2nd week. You moved into my bedroom, ransacked my belongings, and began stealing from me while I washed." He looked at Akim, who stood by the kitchen door, shaking visibly. But not everyone failed the test. He turned to the police officer. "They are now suspects in a case of theft, attempted fraud, and tampering with private property." As the officers moved forward, Janet screamed, "We didn't know. We thought you were gone. We were just scared." But it was too late. Akim watched from the corner, clutching the small notebook in his palm. His eyes welled with tears, not from fear, but from relief. The man he had respected, honored, and obeyed was alive, and had seen everything. Mr. Job, no longer Mr. Eshola, turned to him with a rare smile. "You kept your promise, Akim. And now, it's time to reward loyalty." The compound was quiet again, but this time, for a different reason. The greedy relatives had been escorted out by the police, their heads bowed in shame, their wails trailing behind the patrol van as it drove away. All their dreams of unearned wealth had crumbled in the blink of an eye. Inside the house, the air was peaceful, sacred almost. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt like home. Mr. Job sat alone in the study where it all began, the very room that held the secrets of his legacy. The same room that once echoed with the laughter of fake well-wishers. He looked around, eyes settling on the metal box tucked safely beneath the desk, still unopened. Akim knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Mr. Job said warmly. The gateman entered, cap in hand, posture humble but eyes searching. "Sir, you called me?" "Yes, Hakim," Mr. Job replied, standing up and walking over. "Come. Sit with me." Hakim hesitated. "Sir." "Sit." "Yes," Mr. Job smiled. "Today, we sit as men." Hakim slowly lowered himself onto the cushioned chair opposite his boss, hands trembling. Mr. Job opened the metal box. Inside were several leather folders, keys, a flash drive, property titles, and a sealed envelope. He picked up the envelope and handed it to Hakim. "Open it," he said. Hakim obeyed. Inside was a beautifully written legal document. It read, "Declaration of Next of Kin, Mr. Hakim Alabi, heir to the estate of Mr. Job Olimide Aditeo." Hakim blinked rapidly, his lips quivering. "Sir, I don't understand." Mr. Job leaned forward, voice low but filled with emotion. "When I disappeared, none of them thought to ask why. They saw my absence as opportunity. But you remembered everything. You did not try to benefit from my pain. You guarded what I asked you to. You didn't open the box. You didn't betray me, even under pressure." He paused, looking deeply into Hakim's eyes. "Hakim, I have no son. My daughter is far away, living a different life. You are the only one who proved worthy of my name, my trust, and my legacy." Hakim's head dropped. Tears rolled down his cheeks like quiet rain. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Say nothing," Mr. Job said gently. "But live well. From this day, this estate is under your care. My lawyers will begin the process. I will remain around for a while, but when I go, everything will be in your hands." Hakim sank to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "Sir, I am just a gatekeeper." Mr. Job stood and pulled him up. "No, Hakim. You were never just a gatekeeper. You were a guardian. A faithful one. And now, you're the man who holds everything. Can you now see that in today's world, people often equate closeness with loyalty, assuming that family, friends, or business associates will stand by them through thick and thin? But Mr. Job's experience proves otherwise. Despite his wealth and generosity, his own blood relatives, cousins, nephews, and even siblings were more interested in what he had than who he was. They praised him in his presence but plotted in his absence. Contrast this with Hakim, a simple gatekeeper with no formal education or status. Yet when tested, it was Hakim who showed unwavering integrity. He protected Mr. Job's secrets, honored his instructions, and remained faithful even when no one was watching. In the modern age, where trust is often transactional, Hakim reminds us that character is not determined by class, education, or relation, but by conscience. Never underestimate quiet, humble people. Sometimes, the most trustworthy individuals are not in boardrooms but at your gate, your shop, your office desk, or anywhere loyalty comes not from game but from heart. In addition, Mr. Job's relatives became parasitic. Because they knew he was wealthy, they stopped working and waited for his downfall like vultures around a carcass. Their greed blinded them from reality. They didn't even consider that Mr. Job might be watching them. They assumed his absence was permanent and that they had inherited his estate by default. In modern times, many wealthy individuals face the same problem. Entitlement culture has grown. Siblings, friends, and even adult children sometimes see success as communal, not earned. Mr. Job faked his disappearance not to punish, but to test. Their reaction to his absence proved their hearts. Had they truly loved him, they would have worried more about his safety than his house and properties. But within days, they divided his assets and occupied his rooms. Wealth attracts people, but wisdom reveals their motives. Don't just count those who surround you, test their hearts. Because vultures don't come to help the sick, they come to feed on the dead. Conclusively, Mr. Job could have easily given his properties to his daughter abroad or left them to the courts. But he chose Hakim because of one reason: integrity. In a world driven by flashy appearances, Hakim had something most of Mr. Job's relatives lacked: the ability to be trusted. He didn't know what was in the metal box. He wasn't even promised anything. But he followed Mr. Job's instructions to the letter, even when the relatives searched his room and he feared for his safety. In the end, he received an inheritance not because of chance, but because of character. Whether you're a housemaid, driver, cleaner, assistant, or CEO, integrity is currency. It opens doors that money cannot. And one act of loyalty can change your destiny forever.
Thanks for watching today's story. I believe you enjoyed every bit of it all. Now I want you to do me one favor: subscribe to this channel, like, and turn on the notification bell if you have not done so that whenever I release my next video, you will be notified immediately. See you soon.